Good evening. I'm Spot On Weather meteorologist Matthew Euler, and welcome to the weekly Teleconnections discussion for 29 October 2021. Look at this pumpkin. We are 2 days away from Halloween. It is getting very close, and the weather definitely looks like it's going to cooperate across the mid-Atlantic, specifically in the southeast Virginia. It's looking like a really good evening for all those trick-or-treaters out there on Sunday, Halloween. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Teleconnections discussion for this week. As usual, we're heading into that time of year now, the colder months, where these teleconnections really do make a difference in the overall weather pattern that we're going to see. So let's go ahead and kick things off. The first thing I want to mention in today's video is the Northern Hemisphere 500 millibar height anomalies, generally for the 29th of October 2021. And I'm really primarily again focused on the Northern Hemisphere. The graphic on the left is courtesy of the UK Met 500 millibar geopotential height and anomaly map. And the colors on that map on the left, the maroon colors, the orange colors indicate upper level ridge or anomalously high heights at 500 millibars or 18,000 feet. And the blue and the green shading indicates troughs, upper level troughs, locations where the height anomalies are below normal. And so whenever you see that orange coloring, that upper level ridge, that's usually a location in the atmosphere that is warm and dry. And then the blue and the green shading, those troughs, are locations in the atmosphere where we typically see unsettled and cool weather. So I'm going to go ahead and cover things from west to east on this chart here on the left. Starting off with the upper level ridge. The upper level ridge, which is building over Siberia right now. I'm going to go ahead and highlight that as I mention it. So we got this upper level ridge, generally right in this location over central Siberia, followed by a weak upper level trough over northeastern Siberia, generally indicative of upper level ridge building into the Korean Peninsula. Moving eastward, we have a typhoon being picked up by the westerlies southeast of Japan. There's a little bit of a typhoon here in the western Pacific, and that is racing off to the northeast around this fairly strong upper level ridge over the north central Pacific Ocean. Working our way eastward, we have an upper level trough over the northeastern Pacific, generally in this location right in here, with a downstream ridge over the western U.S. right in this location here, working its way up into the western U.S. And we have a deep, vertically stacked upper level low over the Tennessee Valley, generally in this location. And that is moving very slowly toward the northeast, and it has resulted in quite a bit of rainfall for parts of the southeastern United States on up into the mid-Atlantic over the last 24 hours. Working our way eastward, we have a strong upper level ridge over northeastern Canada with a downstream trough southeast of Greenland. So here's the ridge I'm talking about. And then we have this trough beneath the ridge there over the northwestern Atlantic, southeast of Greenland. And finally, as we work our way, this is the trough, by the way, southeast of Greenland. And as we work our way towards Central Europe, we have a huge ridge that exists right now over central portions of Europe. So that's the overall 500 millibar heights, the anomalies, the current upper air pattern at the present time as of 29 October 2021. All right, now let's move on to a discussion of the Madden-Julian oscillation phases and areas of enhanced convection. Generally, again, these MJO phases run from phases 1 through 8, as indicated right here at the bottom of the screen. We've got phases 1 all the way through 8. All right, and generally, these areas coincide with where we have enhanced upward vertical motion or convection in the tropical western Pacific on into the Indian Ocean. So again, as a reminder, if I have enhanced upper level convection in the Indian Ocean, we would be talking about MJO phases 2 and 3. If we were talking about enhanced convection over the maritime continent, we'd be talking about phases 4 and 5. And then as we work our way eastward towards the Western Pacific, closer to the international dateline. By the way, the international dateline is around 180 degrees west longitude there. If I draw a straight line down from that, generally around phase 8. Phase 8 is associated with convection around that international dateline. Now, for the MJO forecast, I first wanted to let you know that I changed the temperature composites on the left for the months of November, December, and January, since we are about to turn the calendar over on Monday to November 1st. And so I just wanted to introduce you to the temperature anomalies or departures from normal with different MJO phases for the months of November, December, and January on the left. So for example, if I have the MJO in phases 7, 8, and 1, I generally have colder weather across a good portion of the United States. Whereas if I have the MJO in phases 3, 4, 5, and 6, the orange coloring indicates milder than normal temperatures for those particular phases. So the graphic on the right, we're going to start off with the GFS ensemble MJO forecast. And you'll notice that green, that lighter green line there, that's the ENSO GEFS GFS ensemble forecast. And this one goes out to the 11th of November, Veterans Day, and generally showing a MJO staying within the smallest inner circle of the MJO diagram there, the phase diagram, indicating a null phase MJO with minimal impact on the United States. If we look ahead now to the GFS operational, on the left-hand side, that is represented by that lighter blue line, currently in a null phase and looking to stay pretty much in a null phase with minimal impact on the U.S. right on through Veterans Day, November 11th, 2021. The graphic on the right shows the Navy ESPC MJO forecast, and you can see the green line there. A little bit of a difference. Now, the Navy ESPC MJO phase diagram there, that model forecast on the right, that generally runs out from, it goes from the 25th of October all the way out through the 21st of November, a little bit further in time beyond the GEFS and the GFS models. But in general, the Navy ESPC MJO forecast is for the MJO to come out from the null phase into a weaker, lower magnitude phase 1 and 2, over to phase 3, and then gaining a little bit more amplitude away from that inner smaller circle there, indicating greater amplitude or moderate impacts for the United States weather as it rotates through phases 3, 4, and 5. So it's something to keep an eye on with the Navy ESPC MJO forecast. If I were to go back and look at the temperature composites yet again, phases 3, 4, and 5, and as we head into the month of December, that would be associated with milder conditions over a large chunk of the United States. So just keep that in mind. All right, so now let's take a look at the La Nina update. First, starting off with the sea surface temperature anomalies in degrees Celsius, courtesy of the Tropical Tidbits website on the left. The blue coloring indicating below normal water temperatures, the orange coloring indicating above normal water temperatures. So if we look at that graphic on the left, we do see that we have cooler than normal waters across the equatorial eastern and central Pacific. And that is an association with the La Nina that's currently ongoing. We also have a bluer shading there, and I'll go ahead and draw this out here. Go ahead and put this in here. We also have a blue shading right up in this location of the Gulf of Alaska, as well as some cooler waters going down the west coast of the United States. Here again is the La Nina area, the eastern equatorial and central Pacific. Look how far out those cooler than normal waters extend. And then you also have cooler than normal waters off the west coast of South America. Additionally, we have a very anomalously warm area of water continuing to remain in the same location the last 2 to 3 weeks. I've been keeping an eye on this, generally south of the Aleutian Islands over the north central Pacific. So this is going to be real interesting to watch over time to see what happens with that. Additionally, we have milder water, as is typical with La Nina, over the tropical areas of the western Pacific Ocean. So just want to show you what that looked like. Additionally, this is the blue trace represents the water temperatures and how they have fluctuated or changed since early August of 2021. You'll notice how basically just before 17th of September, how the waters have continuously cooled across the Nino 3.4 region. So if you notice this drop off in the temperature right on through today, October 29th, right now we have a value of negative 0.974 degrees Celsius in that Nino 3.4 region. So nearly a 1 degree Celsius below normal water temperature. And that is approaching moderate intensity, by the way, with moderate intensity La Niñas generally going between 1 to 1.4 degrees Celsius below normal in that Nino 3.4 region, which is generally located right in this location here. Additionally, the cooler waters that I mentioned here in the Gulf of Alaska and then along the west coast of the United States are associated. It's an indicator of a negative Pacific decadal oscillation, so you get like this horseshoe shape right here. And that indicates a negative PDO with those cooler waters. Moving on now to the El Nino history and intensity classification. I wanted to throw this in for this week's Teleconnections discussion just to show you some past history of the El Nino Southern Oscillation. If we look at the El Nino years, they range from weak, moderate, strong to very strong, and these are the years of when El Nino has taken place. As recent as 2018-2019 winter, we had El Nino. If we look at La Nina here on the right-hand portion of this table, you'll notice that the classifications for La Nina range from weak to moderate to strong. And by the way, these numbers after these classifications indicate a total of 23 total La Ninas. 11 of those were weak. Here are the years when they were weak. The moderate level La Ninas, we had 5 of those in the past, and these are the years associated with a moderate La Nina, including last winter's 2020-21 winter season. We had a moderate La Nina then. And then there were 7 total strong La Ninas out of the 23, and these are the years that we saw a strong La Nina. As far as classifications, what does weak, moderate, and strong mean as far as La Nina goes? Weak is indicative of a 0.5 to 0.9 degrees Celsius temperature anomaly right here in this Nino 3.4 region. Moderate La Nina ranges from 1 to 1.4 degrees Celsius temperature anomaly for those water temps in the Nino 3.4 region, while strong is 1.5 to 1.9 degrees Celsius anomaly. All right. Generally, this El Nino region, the Nino 3.4 region here, that covers latitudes 5 degrees north to 5 degrees south latitude and 120 degree west to 170 degree west longitude. And so I'm currently working on a presentation taking a look at La Nina, the past La Ninas and the winters of the past. And I'm looking to see, what were the temperature anomalies, courtesy of the PRISM climate folks. And so I'm hoping to have something produced here within the next couple of weeks to kind of show you La Nina and past winters. I break down what the temperature anomalies were across the United States for a weak, moderate, and strong La Nina. But that will be a separate presentation. All right, so let's get to the forecast. Let's look at the Teleconnections forecast for based off the models from 29 October 2021. In general, just keep in mind this is a negative Arctic oscillation aspects. You'll notice with a negative Arctic oscillation, we tend to have a much bigger dip in the polar front jet stream, extending from Canada down into the United States. We tend to get more Arctic air embedded into the U.S., and then we get this with this trough that's developed in the Midwest and Eastern U.S. We get these storms that generally ride up the East Coast with a negative AO. Additionally, in the West or the Eastern Pacific, we get this East Pacific ridge, this upper level ridge, situated in the Northeast Pacific and Gulf of Alaska. Looking at a positive Arctic oscillation on the right-hand side, a little bit of different setup. We get more of a west to east, highly zonal jet stream. But generally north of that polar front jet stream axis is where we got all the Arctic air, which tends to remain further up to the north with a positive Arctic oscillation. We tend to get these areas of lower pressure at the higher latitudes and these areas of higher pressure at the middle latitudes when we got a positive AO. So let's take a look at the forecast. This is the European deterministic AO forecast, generally showing these white circular shapes here show the forecast line, what we're expecting over time. The European deterministic going out to about the 8th of November. So in general, we're looking at a positive AO right on through about the 29th of November, pushing slightly closer to the 30th, October, positive through 29 October, possibly going closer to the 30th of October, then transitioning slightly negative in this area, generally into early November, the first few days of November, before transitioning back positive. The European EPS AO 50 perturb members, notice we have the zero line right here. Okay, so we generally have a neutral type La Nina, maybe slightly a bit negative, but not much. And then you'll notice the Arctic oscillation trends positive. It goes to these positive values, right? So we're looking at a positive AO on this particular model forecast, basically between the 3rd and the 12th of November. And then the forecast calls for things to get back closer to neutral, back to this zero line. We looked at the European EPS AO 50 perturb members. Now this one goes all the way out to around the 12th of December, beyond the 11th there. Again, as a reminder, as I say every week, this model has a tendency to be positive in the longer range as far as the forecast goes, the further out you get. So initially, the European EPS AO 50 perturb members is negative to start right in this location, and then becomes positive right on through the 12th of November, and before transitioning back to negative. And this is showing up on more than just one model here, the potential into December for the Arctic oscillation to become more negative. So that will be an interesting development if that actually verifies. Looking at the GFS deterministic AO forecast, generally here we are today on the 29th of October, showing a negative Arctic oscillation and remaining negative up until about the 3rd of November, then becoming slightly positive and then going back towards neutral at this point, generally around the 8th of November, back down to negative territory. Looking at the ENSO GEFS V12 AO 30 perturb members, Arctic oscillation forecast, again, we have a pretty good consensus here in the short term that we're looking at a slightly negative AO, and then it's going to transition towards neutral by the 3rd of November, and then back positive between the 3rd and the 8th of November before, really getting closer to that neutral line. Now on to the North Atlantic oscillation NAO forecast. Again, the differences between positive versus negative NAO phases. With a positive NAO phase, you'll notice your black lines here. These black arrows represent your polar front jet stream axis, and we have more of a zonal flow across the Atlantic Ocean with a positive NAO phase. You generally get low pressure up into the right around the Iceland region, high pressure to the south. And you generally get warmer conditions across mid-latitudes with a positive NAO phase. Warm and wet across Europe. Now with a negative NAO phase, look at this dip in the jet stream, this trough that develops over the Midwest and eastern U.S., all the way to the eastern seaboard in New England. And then you get this huge upper-level ridge that tends to result in this blocking upper-level high into Greenland, followed by a downstream trough into parts of Central Europe, including the Mediterranean Sea here, where things become generally warmer and wet. Cooler and drier across the northern European area with a negative NAO. Looking at the European deterministic NAO forecast, generally what we're looking at here on the 29th of October is a slightly positive NAO, transitioning closer to neutral, perhaps getting a little bit closer to negative territory by 2 November, before becoming positive again as we head out to 8 November. Looking at the European EPS NAO 50 perturb members all the way out until the 13th of November, generally showing a positive trend to the NAO, generally through the 11th of November, right over in this location here, the 11th of November, and then transitioning back to neutral conditions 11 to 13 November. The European EPS NAO 50 perturb members, now this one goes out much further in time, over to about the 12th of December. Notice how we start off with a slight dip in the NAO towards negative, but then it becomes positive, pretty much lasting through the 11th of November, and then generally dipping a little bit negative and then neutral again, and then a little bit negative and then neutral again. So the AO and NAO, there are some signs in the longer range in December of both of those going towards negative phases, which could have big implications as far as colder temperatures across the eastern United States. GFS deterministic NAO forecast, generally showing neutral NAO, near neutral, transitioning perhaps slightly negative below the zero line, and then remaining neutral and then dipping back down negative between the 7th and the 11th of November, and then rebounding back up towards neutral territory. The ENSO GEFS V12 NAO, 30 perturbed members, showing a general neutral trend to the NAO, and then a positive NAO between the 4th and the generally the 7th of November, back to positive, and then things dip slightly negative again, generally throughout the rest of the period through mid-November. Here is the PNA, Pacific North American forecast. Big differences here. We have a positive PNA phase, we have a negative PNA phase, and with that positive PNA phase here in the bottom left, notice the purple and the blue shadings over the Midwest and Eastern U.S. during a positive PNA. What we get is we get this big upper level ridge that extends all the way up, sometimes as far north as Alaska and across Western Canada. Get this huge upper level ridge that builds, and then downstream of that ridge, what goes up must come down. So we get this deep trough across the eastern U.S. with a positive PNA. In general, below normal temperatures across the eastern U.S. with a positive PNA. Whereas a negative PNA, we get a trough over the western U.S., a big dip in the jet stream, and then this big ridge builds up over the eastern U.S. And so you get milder temperatures in the eastern U.S. with a negative PNA. So that's why we really look at this closely. So it's just kind of like a flip-flop pattern for the pressure. So looking at the European deterministic model, the PNA forecast out through about the 8th of November, generally showing, now this is a big change from last week. So with the PNA, we're showing this huge climb to positive territory. If we look at the y-axis here, you can see the positive values. So this gets up almost to a magnitude of positive 4, generally around the 30th, tomorrow, the 30th of October. Very highly positive. Comes down a little bit there around 1 November, but then it goes back up positive again to about a positive 3 magnitude, back down towards neutral after that. And so this is very big as far as an indicator of building upper level heights across the western U.S. into the western Canada area. And what goes up again must come down. So you get that positive PNA, you're going to get a trough that's going to dig itself downstream of that ridge into the eastern U.S. Looking at the European EPS, PNA, 50 perturbed members forecast out through 13 November. Look at how positive this model is showing the PNA as well. This is pretty significant, up almost to a positive 3 magnitude. And then things start to drift back down closer to neutral by the time we get to the 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th of November. The European EPS, PNA, 50 perturbed member forecast out through 12 December rather. Notice this green line, the forecast showing a very positive PNA, again indicative of a huge ridge across the western U.S. and Canada. And then notice how the PNA does come back towards neutral conditions before transitioning slightly negative the middle part of November, and then back closer to that zero line throughout the rest of the period from about mid-November to mid-December, looking at neutral conditions. And then the GFS deterministic PNA forecast. Look how high in magnitude on the positive side this PNA is, up close to positive 4 value. A little bit of a dip as we turn the calendar to November, and then a rise up again and a dip back down, and then it goes up again and goes back down again. So there's mostly positive over the period. And then the ENSO GEFS V12 PNA 30 perturbed member forecast. Look how positive these values are again, and they remain fairly positive right on through about the 10th of November. And then once you hit the 10th of November right here, notice they kind of trend towards slightly negative. Now on to the Eastern Pacific Oscillation forecast, the EPO. Differences between a negative EPO on the left here and a positive EPO on the right, the positive EPO over here, is look at the pressure pattern difference across the Eastern Pacific. Okay, so with a negative EPO, we tend to get an upper level ridge south of the Aleutian Islands in the northeastern Pacific. We get an area of lower pressure just to the southeast of the Hawaiian Islands. And so what happens here is we get this big ridge, and then you get the jet stream, the purple line, to make this major dip downstream of the ridge. And that allows these Arctic highs, or these bubble highs, to come down out of Canada into the lower 48 to the U.S. and it tends to enhance the cross-polar flow, where we're getting much more colder air from higher latitudes, such over the Arctic region down to the U.S. On the other hand, we get a positive EPO, and we have a different pressure pattern across the northeastern Pacific. We got a fairly strong Aleutian low in the Gulf of Alaska, and then we have high pressure generally extending across the Hawaiian Island, that particular latitude belt around 20 degrees north in the north latitude in the Pacific. We do have, with a positive EPO, these purple arrows represent the jet stream, more of a west-to-east jet stream zonal. So we tend to flood the U.S. between the west coast and the east coast with a lot of mild Pacific air with a positive EPO. All right, so let's take a look at the forecast, the models for the EPO. Now this is European deterministic, and this, again, just like the PNA, is a big difference from last week. So now look at how much of a drop-off we see in the EPO to the negative values, all the way down to a magnitude of -3 by the 2nd of November for the EPO before things start climbing back closer to the neutral line. The European EPO 50 perturbed members. Look at this drop-off again of the EPO. That's indicative of that upper-level ridge building into the northeastern Pacific, and then it comes back closer to neutral. It goes slightly positive again as we get beyond the 5th of November. The European EPO 50 perturbed members out through the 12th of December. Generally, again, shows that major drop-off to negative territory, and then a rebound after 6th November to a positive phase, and then back towards neutral conditions for a bit, and then a little bit of a slightly negative turn in the EPO as we get into December. And then the GFS deterministic EPO forecast, generally showing a positive phase dipping down. Look at that drop off there around 1 November, then back up again, and then closer to that zero neutral line before climbing back to positive territory beyond the 11th of November. And then the NCEP GEFS V12 EPO 30 perturbed member forecast out to 14 November. Look at the drop off to negative territory, so we have a very good consensus amongst the models right on through the 3rd to the 4th of November, where we have this negative EPO. And then things do rebound on this particular GEFS V12 model to slightly positive to neutral territory for the remainder of the period through mid-November. All right, so now let's take a look at the polar vortex update. I was able to get these images back that I could not get last week for the teleconnection discussion. So we're going to start off by talking about the GFS, then we're going to run into we'll talk about the European forecast, and then the GEFS, the GFS Ensemble Forecasting System forecast. Right, so we're looking on these charts. You notice up here we have, these are 10 hectopascal, or 10 millibar level temperatures, plus anomalies in degrees Celsius, okay? In general, the orange shadings on these charts, orange shadings indicate very warm temperatures in the polar stratosphere. These green colors and the blue colors indicate the cooler temperatures in the stratosphere, okay? So in general, what we got on the GFS forecast, or actually this is the current, this is today, the image on the left is today, the 29th of October. We have this huge anomalously warm pool of air sitting at higher latitudes, and whenever you get this kind of warming in the stratosphere at these higher polar latitudes, that tends to lead to a weakening polar vortex. So we have a lot of warming going on, and then I'm extending it out here on the right all the way out to the 8th of November. And so you'll notice a little bit of a change, okay? This area cools over time. So you see this blue coloring, the cooler temperatures replacing where this is. But then you notice this other chunk of very warm air basically trying to pivot back around into that same location over the polar areas in the northern hemisphere. So this is going to be interesting to see if this warming from Siberia rotates and makes it back in and keeps the polar vortex weak. Overall, the assessment down here based on the GFS model is we see a stratospheric warming going on, indicative by these orange colors, with current weakening of the polar vortex. And that is definitely could be a contributor to colder weather in the eastern U.S. in early November. There may potentially be that new stratospheric warming on the horizon in mid to late November, and that might be associated with this chunk of air here. Now, the polar vortex update, the European model, similar scenario for today, 29 October. generally showing the warmer pool of air in the stratosphere at the higher latitudes. And then the forecast for 8 November on the European model, very similar, shows that chunk of warmer air. If it pivots back around and over the top of the North Pole, then we could get a continued weakening of the polar vortex. And then finally, the GEFS, showing again a pool of warmer air for today, 29 October, same location. It's in line with the other models, and generally what we're looking at here is look at this air here. Look at how much warmer than normal this is. The scale's over on the right here. You're looking at upward of 10 to 15 degrees Celsius above normal air in this particular area. So just something to really keep an eye on. The polar vortex, by the way, is at this location here. It's elongated a little bit. So I'll definitely want to point that out for the forecast. All right, another thing I wanted to mention tonight is this interesting teleconnection combinations, and I put this on the social media post last night on Facebook and Twitter. If we're looking this winter at forecast for a negative or easterly QBO, and I keep talking about this, and then this negative North Atlantic oscillation if we get the high latitude blocking in the Atlantic side, just into Greenland and generally that location, northwestern Atlantic. If we combine a weak La Nina, now that's the key. If we look at a weak La Nina, which we're definitely in a La Nina phase this winter, but if it stays weak, that means those temperature departures would have to be 0.5 to 0.9 degrees Celsius below normal in the eastern and central equatorial Pacific. If conditions remain weak, and this is why I emphasize the importance of how strong La Nina gets, because if it remains in the weak La Nina phase, plus we get that negative QBO, the easterly QBO, which is definitely forecast in November, and it stays negative all winter into March. If you get this QBO to be negative, easterly phase in November, and stay negative all winter, look at these temperature departures for the Midwestern U.S. as well as the Eastern U.S. This is the scale here on the bottom, generally in degrees Fahrenheit, showing you temperature departures. These are the years that this has occurred, this combination of a weak La Nina and a negative QBO. 62, 63, 67, 68, 81, 82, 83, 84, 2000, 2001, and then 2014, 15. That was a really cold winter. But look how much colder it is across the east with this combination. And then look how much milder it is out in the west with the yellow and orange shadings. And then if we get a negative QBO and a negative NAO, so we get high latitude blocking, which is indicative of this 500 millibar orange coloring here over the northwestern Atlantic, Greenland. We get the high latitude blocking going on. We get the colder troughs beneath the blocking at high latitudes. This is associated with a negative NAO. And these are the air temperature departures from normal in degrees Celsius. And look at where the coldest air is. It's pretty similar to this chart. So again, we know we're going to have a negative QBO. That's a no-doubter this winter. The real question is how strong does the La Nina get? Does it go up to moderate level La Nina? And then also, do we get a lot of negative NAO activity or we get high latitude blocking? Here is the latest QBO, generally showing a value on, it looks like on the order of just about negative 12 on the latest plot here for the QBO. Here is the latest sounding from Singapore. This is their upper air sounding. And the values are on the bottom, the x-axis here. So this vertical line right down the middle, that's your zero line. Anything to the left of that is negative values. That indicates easterly phase. So if you see this blue line with the sounding as we go up in altitude off the surface, this is all indicative of a negative value QBO. And anything to the right of this zero line here, that is a positive or westerly phase QBO. So a lot of negative QBO going on. Generally, it looks like from about 45 millibars up to 10 millibars, we're in a negative easterly phase of the QBO. So main point here is easterly QBOs, again, favor colder temperatures in the eastern U.S. during the winter, and then that weakening stratospheric polar vortex. And then this is the negative QBO winters. Now, when the winters have a QBO that is easterly or negative for December, January, and February, and it's on the order of negative 10 to negative 15, those values, And like I mentioned, right now we're sitting at about -12. Generally, this is your surface air temperature anomalies in degrees Celsius. Looking at the scale here on the right, you'll notice the purple shading is indicative of values of negative, looks like it's negative 1.25 and negative 1.5 degrees below normal. But in general, you can see the pattern here. Generally in the Midwest and Eastern U.S., it's much colder than normal with these kind of QBO values. And then it's milder here along the West Coast, typically, when that occurs. These are the December to February periods, and these are the years these particular values occurred at the bottom. Right now, looking ahead to the upcoming upper air forecast, this is looking at 500 millibar heights and anomalies. Again, the blue and purple shadings indicative of upper level troughs. These maroon colorings here indicate upper level ridges. Okay, this is the European Ensemble Prediction System, the EPS. We're starting off here in the upper left this is Sunday, 31 October. This is Halloween. And so we have that trough that is basically over New England, and it's pushing off to the northeast slowly. We got this huge ridge into Greenland. I mean, this is a big time ridge. And then we have another trough. The next trough is waiting in the wings upstream from the east coast on Sunday, the 31st of October. Then you got another huge ridge that's extending. This is that ridge associated with that positive PNA that I was talking about earlier when we were looking at that. And then you got an upper level trough further back to the west. All right, so over time, when we get to, this is Tuesday, 2 November, European EPS, generally showing that ridge persistent there across west central Canada. And then we have a downstream trough across the upper Midwest, and the jet stream flattens out a bit as you go from the Great Lakes into New England. And then you still got this upper level ridge just southeast of Greenland. So these two upper level height centers, upper level ridges, are really interesting as far as how far north they're extending. Bottom left here is European EPS for Saturday, 6 November. The blue shading indicating those below normal heights associated with the trough across the eastern U.S. Now you'll notice a little bit of change here to the ridge orientation between the second up here in the upper right and then the bottom left here on the 6th of November. It tends to reorientate itself a bit, the ridge axis, further to the northwest. And then bottom right here shows 8 November. General forecast, the trough is making its way onshore to the Pacific Northwest. And then you got more of a flattened feature, a little bit of a troughing here across the mid-Atlantic by the 8th of November. And then the GEFS forecast, this is for 31 October as well. Again, very similar to the European EPS, showing that trough over New England, slowly pushing northeast out to sea. This huge upper-level ridge still in place south of Greenland, and then another upper-level ridge over west central Canada with a trough offshore of the Pacific Northwest. Looking ahead to the 2nd of November, again, notice these upper-level heights, these high-pressure centers aloft, higher heights aloft over west central Canada as well as into northwest Atlantic. And then 6th November, that ridge persists on the GEFS, and then this would be the 8th of November. But general, you look at the overall pattern, we see troughing across the eastern U.S. This is much more amplified, of course, on Sunday, 31 October, as well as 2 November. So we do expect some pretty chilly air to make its way down into the eastern U.S. All right, so here's my final thoughts on tonight's video. The MJO is currently in the null phase, with minimal impacts expected to U.S. weather over the next 10 days. The La Nina conditions continue across the equatorial eastern Pacific, where we see a nearly 1 degree Celsius below normal water temperature in that Nino 3.4 region. La Nina tends to favor milder temperatures across the mid-Atlantic for the winter season. Sea surface temperature anomalies, we are showing, earlier we showed the cooler than normal water across the Gulf of Alaska, with warmer than normal water over the north central Pacific Ocean, with a negative cold PDO look, coolest temperatures along the U.S. West Coast and the Gulf of Alaska. And overall, a negative PDO plus a La Nina type of setup generally indicates milder temperatures across the southeastern and mid-Atlantic United States. For the Arctic Oscillation AO, models are indicating a positive, then a transition to negative, back to positive trend in the AO between now and middle November. So overall, averaged out over time, we're looking at the AO balancing out to be neutral with near average temperatures. That would be a near average temperature indicator for the eastern U.S. And then models are also indicating a slightly negative to neutral trend in the NAO, with slightly cooler temps in the short term with a slightly negative phase of the NAO, transitioning to near average temperatures across the eastern U.S. into the middle of November. And then models are indicating, now these are the big ones to me, the models are indicating a strongly positive PNA through 7 November, transitioning to near neutral conditions. And this strongly positive PNA promotes above normal heights in the ridge over western U.S. and Canada, with lower than normal heights, the troughing across the eastern U.S. with cooler temperatures there. Models are also indicating a strongly negative trend in the eastern Pacific Oscillation, the EPO, through 5 November, transitioning to near neutral. So that would be indicative of colder than normal temps across the eastern U.S. in early November. And then the models are indicating a sudden stratospheric warming to continue for the short term, weakened stratospheric polar vortex in early November. Possibilities for further disruptions to the stratospheric polar vortex are definitely being indicated on some of the models. So again, this is going to be a case of wait and see. Does that polar vortex recover or remain weak? That will be the big golden question as we head into the month of November and with potential downstream impacts into months of December and January. So in general, we'd expect colder temperatures across the eastern U.S. in early November with that weakened stratospheric polar vortex. So the overall assessment based on the teleconnections, generally we're looking at, to me, the biggest players are the Pacific teleconnections for the, let's say, the next 5 to 7 days, where we're seeing this strongly positive PNA and this strongly negative EPO. And the combination of these two, now this is a great example, and I talk about it regularly. This is a good case of constructive interference where these two are working in the same direction. So they basically, both of these favor the positive PNA and negative EPO favor the upper level ridge across the western U.S. into western Canada, and then favor that downstream trough across the eastern U.S. Additionally, we have a weaker than normal polar vortex. Those are really, again, the main impactful teleconnections for this next week. We're going to expect to see cooler temperatures with the troughing across the eastern U.S. into early November. In fact, some of that air could get downright chilly as we head in from Wednesday 3 November through Friday 5 November. Additionally, we took a look at the MJO, the NAO, and AO. Even if these trend, the NAO and AO, let's say, even if they trend towards the positive or negative side, right now, in the short term, the next 10 days, they really aren't trending very greatly in one direction, positive or negative. And so the NAO and AO, I really don't see them being as major players right now, as well as the MJO being in the null phase. I just don't see that playing as a major player over the next 10 days. I expect minimal impacts from those three teleconnections. And then the QBO, again, as I showed you, remains in an easterly negative phase. So that is going to be interesting to see what happens over time for the winter. All right, that wraps things up tonight on the Teleconnections video for 29 October 2021. I certainly hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope that you learn from these videos. I certainly wish everybody the best. Hope that everybody's doing very well out there. We definitely appreciate your subscription to the Spot On Weather YouTube channel. Don't forget to look us up on Facebook as well as Twitter, where we're very active on those two social media platforms with latest forecasts. And additionally, don't forget, we got a lot of cool things on the Spot On Weather Weebly website. Just feel free to go in there, Spot On Weather Weebly website, and take a look at some of our tabs at the top, including the More tab, where we got a lot more information beneath that, a lot of cool stuff on the website. All right. Thank you so much for listening in on this week's Teleconnection discussion. Take care and God bless.